The kingdom of New Albion was full of light and tall towers that touched the sky. Long ago, the world had been broken by wars and storms, but the people had worked hard to rebuild it. Now the great city shone with power and machines that could fly even to the stars. In a palace above the city lived Queen Margaret and her only daughter, Princess Elise. The queen was wise and calm, beloved by the people for her fairness. She ruled with a clear mind. But the princess was different. Elise did not like wearing heavy gowns or sitting still through long meals of the court. She loved walking through the workshops and the shipyards. The smell of metal and the hum of engines were sweeter to her than any song. From a young age, she asked how things worked. She would sit beside the mechanics and study the machines that kept the city alive. The workers liked her because she spoke with honesty and real curiosity, not the empty politeness of nobles. Sometimes she forgot she was a princess at all, but her mother worried. The queen thought a princess should learn diplomacy, not circuits and fuel cells. She would say, "My daughter, one day you will lead people with your words and your choices. It's not with these tools." And Elise would answer softly, "Mother, how can I lead what I do not understand?" One evening, when the sky turned silver and the lights of the city began to glow, Elise heard that the engineers were testing a new kind of ship. It was meant to fly faster than anything before it and could travel far beyond Earth. The test field lay outside the city gates, near the old hills. The test was planned for midnight, but Elise could not wait until morning to hear the result. She put on a simple coat that hid her royal mark and slipped out of the palace alone. The road to the test field was quiet except for the hum of drones flying overhead. When she reached the open plains, she saw the ship standing tall like a silver spear ready to pierce the stars. A group of engineers worked around it. They were ordinary men and women, in plain suits covered with dust and grease. Among them was Daniel, a young man known for his skill with engines and his almost stubborn bravery. He was not one to leave a task unfinished. Elise stayed behind the fence and watched. She saw how Daniel spoke to his team, not with orders, but with calm firmness. He smiled often, even when others were tired. The launch began with a sharp sound. Blue fire lifted under the ship, and for a moment it rose smoothly. Then came the sound of thunder. Something failed deep inside the engines. Fire burst out from the middle section. Alarms screamed. Everyone ran for cover. The ship crashed down sideways, metal bending and catching flame. Smoke filled the air. People shouted for help as the support tower fell against the ground. Elise's heart pounded. She wanted to run forward, but fear held her feet. Then she saw Daniel. He had not fled. He ran back into the fire to free a mechanic caught under a pipe. The air shook with heat. Sparks flew across the ground, cutting his sleeve, burning his skin. Yet he kept pulling until the woman was free. Then he helped 2 more men limp away from the wreck. When the fire reached the fuel cells, Daniel turned and pressed a command on his wrist console. Drones swooped down and dropped foam that smothered the flames. He had planned even for disaster. Elise could not move. Her eyes stayed fixed on him through the smoke and orange light. After the rescue teams arrived, he sat on the ground, coughing but still checking that everyone was safe. Someone wrapped his burnt arm, but he waved off help until the others were cared for. Only when the last injured worker was lifted onto a stretcher did he let himself rest. From her hidden place, Elise whispered, "So this is what courage looks like." She had read about heroes in her lessons. They were always covered in armor and jewels, always speaking grand words. But Daniel wore no crown, only soot and sweat, and yet he seemed brighter than all the palace chandeliers. By dawn, the storm clouds from the fire had cleared. The sun rose red over the city towers. Soldiers guarded the field, keeping onlookers away. Elise remained in the shadows, unable to leave. When at last, Daniel stood and looked toward the sky, his eyes seemed filled not with pride but with quiet thought. He spoke to no one, but she could see from his face that he meant to try again, to build another ship, stronger and safer. She saw his hands shake from exhaustion, yet there was calm purpose in every movement. Elise turned toward the city path. She felt something change inside her, a question that would not go away. She wanted to know the man who stayed while others fled. She wanted to hear how he thought, how he dreamed. When she returned to the palace, dust still clung to her coat. The guards did not recognize her until she entered the great hall. The queen saw her and frowned. sensing her daughter had been somewhere the court should not go. That morning, no one yet knew that the princess had met the man who would one day change the fate of the crown. The next morning, the palace was filled with talk about the fire at the test field. Servants whispered that the new ship had been destroyed. Ministers spoke in worried tones about the lost investment. But what caught everyone's attention was one name. They said a young engineer named Daniel had saved several workers by risking his own life. Some called him reckless. Others called him brave. Princess Elise sat quietly at the breakfast table, while the queen listened to reports from her advisors. The queen said, "Who is this man they speak of? I want to see him for myself." The palace owes him gratitude. Elise tried to hide her smile. She knew that sooner or later her mother would meet the man she had seen in the firelight. But part of her feared what the queen would think of him. He was not a noble, not born to wealth. He was a worker with ideas, and the palace did not always treat such people kindly. A few days later, Daniel was brought to the Great Hall. He had received a formal letter of thanks signed by the queen herself, and now he was to present himself before her. The courtiers stood in their lines, their robes shining, their faces curious. A man in plain clothes among them looked strange, almost out of place, yet his steps were steady. Elise watched from beside her mother's throne. Daniel bowed low, but not with fear. His burned arm was still bandaged. Queen Margaret's voice echoed through the hall. "You are Daniel from the royal shipyard?" "Yes, Your Majesty," he said. "I worked on the engine system. The accident was due to a fault in the cooling design. I am sorry for the loss." The queen studied him with sharp eyes. "Many say you risked your life to save others." Daniel lowered his head. "Anyone would have done the same." "Not everyone would," the queen said. The courtiers shifted, whispering. The queen continued, "Your courage deserves thanks. What is it you wish in return?" "I wish only that the team be allowed to build again," Daniel answered. "We learned from our mistakes. If given another chance, we can succeed." The queen smiled slightly. "Your request is humble. It will be granted." But as she watched him, she noticed how Elise's gaze was fixed upon him. The queen had raised her daughter too well not to notice such a look. She said no more, yet in her heart a question began to grow. After Daniel left the hall, the queen turned to Elise. "He seems bold for a worker," she said quietly. Elise replied, "He is brave, mother, and honest too." "And you know this how?" the queen asked, raising an eyebrow. Elise paused. "I saw him at the test field that night." The queen frowned. "You were there?" Elise nodded. "I watched from afar. I saw what he did." The queen's expression softened and then grew serious.
"You act without thought, my daughter.
It is not safe for you to go wandering beyond the palace."
Yes, mother,"
Elise said, though her heart still carried the sight of Daniel against the firelight. Weeks passed.
True to his word, Daniel and his team began work again. The palace engineers asked for his advice, and his ideas soon improved every project he touched. The queen heard reports of a new stabilizer design that could withstand the harsh storms beyond Earth's orbit. The workers began calling him the Master of Balance. Elise visited the shipyard often under the reason that she was checking progress on the new fleet. Each time she came, she found Daniel surrounded by his crew, his hands stained with metal dust, his eyes bright with excitement over each small success. One afternoon, as she watched him test a model engine, he turned and saw her standing there. "Your Highness," he said with a smile, "the new engine will not fail this time." She stepped closer.
"Oh, you sound certain."
"I am," he said. "We learn most when things break. Failure teaches faster than praise." Elise laughed softly. "Speak like a teacher." "Maybe because machines listen better than people," he said, half joking. They talked for a long while about all the ways power could be made more stable, and how ships might fly safer across the stars. But as they spoke, the talk changed into stories of the past, their families, and their hopes. Daniel told her he was raised in the southern districts, where storms still struck each winter. His father had died in a flood, and he had sworn to build things that could stand against any force of nature. Elise listened with quiet respect. She told him of her life in the palace, lonely, despite the gold and grand walls. They both realized they wanted the same thing, to build a better world, not through power, but through understanding. When Elise returned home that night, her thoughts were filled with his words. For the first time, she dreamed not of machines, but of a person who seemed to understand her heart. Soon people in the palace began to notice small changes. The princess smiled more often. She spent long hours in the workshops. Daniel, meanwhile, began to appear at official meetings, his ideas drawing the queen's attention. Queen Margaret felt both pride and unease. The kingdom had never been stronger, and Daniel's designs pushed its progress faster than ever. Yet she saw the way her daughter watched him, and the way he spoke to her, not with fear, but with true respect. Late one evening, the queen stood by the window overlooking the shipyard lights. Her advisor asked, "Do you trust this man, my queen?" The queen answered softly, "I trust his mind. I am not yet sure if I can trust what my daughter's heart is beginning to feel." Beneath the same moonlight, Daniel looked up at the palace from the shipyard below. He wondered if the princess still thought of that night by the flames. He wondered, too, why her face had stayed in his mind when all the machines around him had faded from focus. Months passed peacefully in New Albion, but peace does not always last. Beyond the borders of the shining city, other kingdoms watched with envy. They saw its tall towers, its silver ships, and the bright energy that lit its nights. One rival nation wanted the new designs Daniel had created, the same designs that made ships fly faster and safer. They sent spies to steal them, and soon small acts of sabotage began to trouble the royal shipyards. Engines failed without warning, power lines snapped, and even the city's defense towers faltered for a moment. The queen called her council at once. "Someone is trying to break us from within," she said. "We must be ready for anything." Daniel was summoned to the palace with the other engineers. The queen looked at him in front of the council. "Your work has changed this city. Now, it may also be what our enemies want most. Can you protect it?" Daniel bowed. "Yes, Your Majesty. But to protect it fully, I will need all the shipyards working together. The workers trust me. Let me lead them. We can build a stronger defense." The queen thought carefully, then nodded. "Do it. The safety of our people depends on you." Princess Elise felt proud as she watched Daniel speak with courage before the council. He did not tremble or flatter. He spoke as a man who believed in his work and his people. She saw how her mother listened to him with respect rather than suspicion. Yet at the same time, Elise felt worry. Danger was now close to them. From that day, Daniel worked harder than ever, spent nights in the shipyard testing engines and sharpening the new defense systems. Elise often came to help, bringing food or reading data reports when he grew too tired to think clearly. They stood together under the noisy light of the hangars while workers hurried around them. One night, Elise watched sparks fall from a welding arm and said, all this light and noise, it never stops. Does it ever become too much?" Daniel smiled, his hands smeared with oil. "Not when I know what I'm building. These machines will keep this city safe. Every spark means we are one step closer to peace." "You talk of peace like it is something we can build," she said. "Maybe we can," he answered. "Not just peace between nations, but peace between hearts that understand each other." His words stayed with her long after she left the shipyard. Weeks later, the test of their new defense ship was held near the northern river. The queen herself came to watch. The ship lifted gently into the air, smooth as glass, then soared high before cutting through the clouds. Below, engineers cheered, and Elise laughed with delight. But just as the ship turned to land, an explosion flashed on one of the towers. The crowd screamed. Smoke filled the sky again. Daniel shouted for his team to cut the power. Fire roared from the tower's side, burning through the defense cables. Without hesitation, Daniel raced up the emergency ladder. "Clear the area," he called out. "I can fix the coolant feed." Elise ran forward, shouting his name, but soldiers held her back. The queen stood stiff and pale. The flames climbed higher while everyone waited below. Minutes later, Daniel appeared through the smoke, carrying a small child from one of the maintenance families who lived near the towers. His clothes were blackened. His face was streaked with soot. He set the child down gently before falling to his knees. Elise rushed to him, ignoring the guards who tried to stop her. She knelt beside him, her hand on his shoulder. "You're hurt?" He shook his head. "It's nothing." I had to be sure the others got out. The queen came closer then. She looked at Daniel, at her daughter, who refused to move away from him, at the workers kneeling around them in silence. She saw something she had not before, a man of ordinary birth showing a courage greater than any general. Later that night, Daniel lay in the medical wing while Elise stayed beside his bed. The doctor said he would recover soon. In the quiet of that room, she whispered, "Every time danger comes, you stand in its path." Why? He looked at her with tired eyes. Because if we stop protecting what we love, then we lose everything that matters. Elise felt tears rise but forced them back. "And what do you love, Daniel?" He smiled faintly. "This world we're rebuilding, and perhaps the person who reminds me why it's worth saving." Her heart beat fast at his words. She did not speak, only took his hand gently so he would rest. The Queen visited later, walking softly into the room. She looked at the two of them in silence. Something in her heart softened as she watched her daughter keep vigil beside the man who had once been just a name in a report. The next morning, the Queen called her council again. Warships from the rival nation had been spotted beyond the space gates. They were coming closer. The Queen turned to Daniel and said, "You have built machines that can fly and fight. Now I ask you to lead them." "Okay, protect our people, yes, Your Majesty," Daniel said with steady voice. He rose, still weak, but determined. Elise stood near him, her face pale but proud. Everyone in the room could see something passing between them, quiet yet strong as light piercing through metal. The storms of the coming war had begun to stir, but so too had something far deeper, something no enemy could ever tear down. The war came quietly at first. News spread that the rival nation had launched small attacks along the border colonies. Communication lines were cut and trade ships vanished beyond the clouds. In the royal palace of New Albion, every room filled with tension. Soldiers prepared to defend the skies, and the shipyards worked day and night. Daniel was now in command of the royal fleet. Though he was not a soldier by birth, his mind was sharper than any weapon. He stood before his team, explaining each plan in clear words. He said, "We will not fight for power. We will fight to protect our home." His calm voice gave courage to everyone around him. Princess Elise visited the command center often. She helped read signals and studied the star maps that filled the walls with glowing dots. Daniel tried to keep her far from danger, but she refused. She said, "I will not hide while others risk their lives." The Queen heard of her daughter's actions and sighed deeply. She was proud of Elise's courage, but afraid of her heart. It was clear now that Elise cared for Daniel deeply. Every time his name was spoken, her eyes lit with quiet joy. The Queen knew what that meant, and it worried her more than the war itself. One evening, the Queen called her daughter to the royal chamber. The fire in the hall burned low. "Elise," she said, "you are heir to this throne. Cannot let feelings lead you into danger. The man you admire is brave, I do not deny that, but he is not of royal blood. The court will never accept him." Elise looked straight at her mother. "Mother, when fire consumes a ship, does it ask who built it before it saves it?" Daniel's worth is not in his name, but in his spirit. The Queen turned away. "You speak like someone in love?" "I speak like someone who has seen truth," Elise answered softly. "Daniel is more noble than any crown could make him." The Queen said no more. She feared arguing might push her daughter further toward what her heart already wanted. Days later, the first great battle began. Daniel led his fleet beyond the clouds. From the palace tower, Elise watched the ships rise like a silent swarm of silver light. She whispered a prayer that he would return safely. The Queen stood beside her without speaking. Hours felt like days. The screens in the command hall flashed with updates. Reports came and went. At last, a clear message arrived from Daniel's command ship. His voice came through strong and steady, filled with purpose. "The enemy is retreating. We stood firm. The skies are ours." The hall burst into cheers. Elise pressed her hands to her heart, tears of relief shining in her eyes. The Queen allowed herself a smile. "He did it," she whispered. When Daniel returned, the city greeted him as a hero. People lined the streets, waving flags and shouting his name. He did not smile as kings do, but bowed to the crowd in gratitude. The Queen invited him and his officers to a grand banquet at the palace. That night, the great hall glittered with music and laughter. Soldiers, nobles, and ministers filled the room. Yet even among them, Daniel stood apart. His clothes were clean but plain. His eyes, however, burned bright with life. Halfway through the feast, the Queen rose to speak. "Tonight we celebrate peace," she said. "We give honor to those who fought for our safety." Her gaze turned toward Daniel, especially to our brave leader, the man whose hands built both our ships and our victory. The crowd applauded loudly, but deep down the queen was still uncertain. She saw the way Elise looked at him again and again. It was not the admiration of a loyal citizen. It was something more powerful. Then, like lightning splitting a calm sky, the moment came. The music stopped when the queen asked Princess Elise. "Many noble families have offered alliance through marriage since peace returned. Have you considered their proposals?" The hall fell silent. Everyone turned to the princess. Elise stood, her white dress shimmering under the lights. Her face was calm, but her heart beat fast. She looked toward Daniel, who stood at the side of the hall, unaware of her next words. With clear voice, she said, "I have considered them, mother, yet my choice is already made." The queen's eyes narrowed slightly. "And who have you chosen, my daughter?" Elise lifted her head proudly. "The man I have chosen as my husband is Daniel, the one who saved our people and captured my heart." For a long moment, the hall was still. Then a wave of gasps spread across the room. Nobles whispered urgently to one another. Some looked shocked, others curious. A few even smiled. The queen's expression changed from surprise to deep thought. She'd imagined this moment, yet hearing it aloud cracked something open in her heart. She looked at Daniel, who stood motionless, astonishment in his eyes. At last the queen spoke, her voice calm but firm. "You choose a man of common birth. You understand the meaning of this decision?" Elise nodded without a tremor. "Yes, mother. I choose him because of who he is, not what title he owns. He is human, brave, and good. That is what I want beside me." The queen looked around the hall. Every face waited for her answer. For the first time in many years, she felt uncertain of what a queen should say. Her life, she had ruled with logic and law. And now she saw in her daughter's eyes something no law could name. She sat back slowly, her voice now quiet. "Let everyone here remember this night. The princess has spoken her heart, and the world will hear her words." The musicians lowered their instruments. The crowd remained hushed. The queen turned toward Daniel. "What say you to this, young man?" Daniel bowed deeply. "I never dreamed of such honor, your majesty, but I cannot deny my heart. I love the princess, and I will spend my life proving I am worthy of her." The queen said nothing more. The hall seemed to breathe again. Some guests clapped shyly, others loudly. Elise's eyes sparkled with both fear and joy. History would remember that night as the moment when silence in the royal hall became the sound of a new beginning. For many days after the banquet, the royal palace was filled with whispers. Some nobles were angry, saying a princess could not marry a man without a title. Others said it was a story of destiny, something noble and pure that brought hope to everyone. The city outside the palace waited to hear what the queen would decide. Inside her chambers, Queen Margaret sat alone by the window. She looked down at the city lights that flickered like stars below her. All her life she had ruled with reason, yet now her heart and duty were at war. She could still hear her daughter's clear voice saying, "The man I have chosen as my husband is Daniel." Those words echoed in her mind again and again. She knew they came from truth, not rebellion. The next morning, Elise met her mother in the throne room. The air was quiet except for the soft hum of wind through the tall glass walls. "Mother," Elise said gently, "I did not mean to shame you before the nobles." The queen turned to face her. "You did not shame me, my daughter. You reminded me that love has more power than pride." She sighed deeply. "But the world may not understand what your heart understands. If you choose this path, there will be struggle." Elise stepped closer. "Then let there be struggle. I would rather fight for what is real than live with what is false." The queen looked at her and felt the same strength she once had in her younger years. At that moment, something inside her softened completely. "Then let it be so," she said. "I give my blessing." News spread through the city like a wave. Citizens filled the streets with cheers and bright lights. The royal musicians played songs in every square. People from distant towns came just to see the man who had won the heart of the princess. Daniel stood by the balcony of the palace, unable to believe the sight before him. He had lived most of his life in the quiet rhythm of machines, holding wrenches instead of crowns. How he looked upon the same city he had helped build, only this time as part of its greatest story. The wedding day arrived under a golden sky. The palace gardens were filled with flowers glowing in soft colors. Guests came from far places and from every level of society. The queen herself walked with her daughter down the long path of white petals. She placed Elise's hand in Daniel's and spoke in a clear voice so all could hear. Love is not made in courts or in crowns. It is made in hearts that choose each other in peace and in storm. Today my daughter chooses not just a husband, but a future built on courage. When the ceremony ended, bells rang across the city. The crowd outside shouted and clapped until the sound filled the sky. For the first time in many years, everyone felt united. In the months that followed, Daniel did not become a man of idleness. He worked even harder, helping rebuild the outer colonies and teaching young engineers how to design stable systems. Princess Elise joined him, creating programs where nobles and workers could learn together. Under their guidance, New Albion began to change. There were fewer walls between classes, more voices heard in the council. The queen watched silently but joyfully. She often said they lead with hearts first, then minds. Perhaps that is what this world always needed. One evening, as twilight fell over the city, Daniel and Elise stood on the highest balcony. The air was soft and smelled of rain. Below them, the lights of New Albion shimmered in quiet beauty. Elise said, "When I was young, I wanted to build machines that could change the world." Daniel smiled. "You did, but not all machines are made of metal. Some are made of hope." She laughed, resting her head on his shoulder. "And you were the spark that started it." He looked out toward the stars. "No, we started it together, and it will not end with us." From that night on, they ruled together, not as queen and husband, but as partners who shared one dream. People called them the Builders of Light. Their story was told to children for generations, not as a fairy tale, but as a lesson of courage and choice. Years later, when Queen Margaret grew old, she passed her crown to Elise and Daniel. In her final speech, she said, "A kingdom's power is not in its walls or weapons. It lies in the hearts that refuse to divide." Then she smiled and added softly, "I once asked, 'Who is he?' I now know he is the man who proved humanity's light is brightest when shared." After her words, the palace bells rang one last time for the old queen, and the people stepped into a new age. Under the rule of Elise and Daniel, peace spread through every corner of the realm. Each new ship that left Earth carried not soldiers, but explorers filled with curiosity and kindness. The learning centers they built trained engineers, doctors, and teachers. No one was called common anymore. Every person was seen as a builder of the same future. When the years grew long, Daniel and Elise would walk on the quiet terraces of the palace gardens, watching the stars together. The same stars under which they had first found each other's courage. They spoke not of crowns, but of small things they still wanted to create. A new workshop, a new school, a home filled with laughter. Their lives became a living message that true greatness lies not in birth, but in the heart that chooses love over power. And so their love became the pulse of New Albion itself, lighting every dark corner, reminding generations that humanity's finest invention is not the machine, but the bond between two souls who believe in one another